I'm Joe Edmiston, Executive Director of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and we have an interesting panel here. So everybody keeps asking me, Joe, if Mother Nature is our nurturing mother, how come things are so screwed up? Namely, floods, fires, all the stuff, mudslides, everything we know. And I, come to some of my personal background and I say, well, you know what? What happened to you when you didn't follow your mother's instructions? Okay? And so this panel is designed to talk to us about how we can get back to following our mother's instructions and thereby getting right with the world. We're going to start with Edgar Westerhoff, and we were just talking, and I said, so Arcadis, is that an acronym? That's the high-up official and consulting firm. And he says, no, we deal with land and water and everything else, and so that's the reason we have this, So good. He's a water consultant. He's been working for 18 years in the field, and he's going to tell us how we can learn from the experiences both of his firm here and in the Netherlands. So Edgar, join us.
Thank you. I'll just stay behind this table here. So thanks for having me on this panel. It's quite an honor. And I have to admit, it's the first time I'm in Los Angeles. So please be gentle with me. I live in New York City. I'm a transplant from the Netherlands. I've been in the US now for almost 6 years. But maybe we should take like half a step back. I understand we have about 5 minutes, so I'll keep it brief and brisk. The Netherlands, a couple of numbers, 30% of the country, we have 17 million people approximately, 30% is below sea level. If there were no levees and gates, about 60% of the Netherlands would be exposed to regular flooding. And if you look at a city like Rotterdam, 90% of that city is below sea level, with the lowest point of minus 18 feet. So if you take a closer look at that city, a city like Rotterdam, which is really thriving economically with a lot of multinationals, it's really the engine of companies, or sorry, cities we have in the Netherlands. It is really, an interesting picture if you overlay the map, with the ground elevations, with all the assets that we have in the city, and you understand that the water is coming through the rivers. The water is coming from the sea, the water is coming through the ground, the water is coming from above through rain. And you also understand that you need to have a bathtub to protect a city like Rotterdam. Well, you understand that water management, city scale water management is really vital. The good thing here also, of course, we've been practicing water management for a long, long time. Our Dutch governance always takes pride in telling everyone that we've done it for hundreds of years, which is literally the case, over 800 years. And that process has given us, a very good, I would say, systems understanding. We really know thoroughly all the data components, how it interacts, how we collaborate as a country at various levels, various scales. So there's no misunderstanding when it comes to water management, and also the 1.5% of our GDP that is annually being spent on water management, on what we do. And that is quite an experience that we bring throughout the world, and myself in New York City. So after I moved to New York, a couple months later, Sandy struck. And I biked through the city, and I saw firsthand, how the city tried to prepare. I saw the big multinationals, global firms like Goldman Sachs, Verizon, preparing with sandbags in front of their main entrances. And from my perspective, completely ridiculous. I mean, how can you be a firm like that and manage data and manage risk from a financial perspective, but not be able to manage your own property, your own building? Well, we've seen the spin-off from that. A lot is happening. 5 years into Sandy now. New York City really taking the lead, I believe, when it comes to city resilience, an expertise that is also brought to many other cities. Boston is stepping up. Miami is starting to understand that they do have a big problem. So it's really intriguing to see how, all the technicalities that are known. I mean, there's no innovation when it comes to solution. There's true innovation in defining a process that fits with these governance organizations. And it's very, very much needed. I could speak for hours about numbers. Boston, between 6 and 8 feet by the end of the century. So locations like the Seaport District, South Boston, where billions and billions have been invested over the past decade. How are you going to protect that? What Boston has in common with LA is, traffic, a lot of traffic jams. The difference between LA and, as far as what I've seen so far, is that a lot of the traffic in Boston sits underground through tunnels, which of course is a big threat looking 20, 50 years ahead. So I think a good takeaway from my perspective for each city is to understand your risk, understand your system, define a process, and know how to collaborate, find each other, wipe all the rules off the table, and try to identify common objectives, like where do you want to be? And with that in mind, I would say a P3, and I've heard a lot about that past 2 days. P3s happen naturally, because if you collaborate, you know how to find each other, and that's where we need to be. Thank you.
Right. So after 30% of your country is underwater, right, or would be, so maybe about 45% of our country is politically underwater. Do you have an engineering solution for that?
I'm trained
We'll
not
take
to
that up
answer
in the
political
public comment
questions.
Laura Janau is the Regulatory Affairs Manager for the Southern California Edison Company. And I want to just give a shout out to Edison. During the fires, I was out there with the yellow Nomex on. And just right after the fire, there was Edison trying to restore the service. But at a certain point, trying to play catch-up ball for Edison and everybody else is a no-win solution. So I'm going to call upon Laura to act proactively and say, how can we get ahead of the game, Laura?
Well, thanks, Joe. So let me set the stage a little bit here. So my job is to monitor the PUC and to monitor what Edison's up to. So basically, I oversee our proceedings and try and align what we're doing at Edison with where the PUC is trying to take the state of California. So these days, that means fire. Our number one priority at Edison is trying to solve the wildfire problem that has come upon us in the last couple of months. So for those of you who are unaware, and I think that's probably very few of you, but I'll set the stage, let me give you some facts of the fire. So on December 4th, we had the Thomas fire start in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, and that burnt 280,000 acres of California. And then on December 5th, we had 2 more fires start, and that burned about 20,000 acres of California. And then on December 7th, we had another fire start, and that burnt about 300 acres. So in the month of December alone, we had 300,000 acres of California burn in our service territory. So as Joe mentioned, we had recovery, it takes different forms. So we had people who were helping to put up poles alongside firefighters during the fires so that we can keep people on. We had people who were trying to deal with transmission emergencies because we have some very big transmission lines that run through Santa Barbara and that were threatened by fire. We had people who were starting to figure out what you do if you owe a bill and your fire's just burned down. How do you help people who have very real effects of fire? So we're doing that, and a month later, we have mudslides. And we have to replace more poles, and we have to help more people who are affected by these kind of extreme climate events that are our new normal, as the governor has called them. So what started out as monitoring the weather because it looked like it might be bad has turned into kind of full-time recovery. We're trying to rebuild parts of our electric system at a time when the very landscape that was built upon has changed significantly. And the crisis for some people will be, well, you'll get the poles back and you'll get people back into homes and they'll get power and their accounts will be fine and it'll be passed, right? Well, no, it won't be passed because what the fires have illustrated are some real big policy issues we in the state of California have to deal with. And it's not just the PUC and utilities like Edison that have to do that. There's going to be a broad set of stakeholders that are going to be required to grapple with some real issues for the state and for the future. For example, the ones we think should urgently be addressed are, what are the standards for building critical infrastructure? It's not just undergrounding. If you choose to underground, you may be cutting off certain technological advances that people want. President Picker at the PUC is very fond of saying, if we want to go to a world where 5G is what helps self-driving vehicles, you're not going to do that if you have underground utilities. How do you balance those things? What are the standards? Another one is, in this era where I think one of the statistics is 44% of Californians are in kind of urban wild interface areas. What are the standards for building in those locations? What kind of house do you have to put in? Do you get electricity? Does your electricity stay on? Does it get turned off if there's a fire? That's another question we need to answer. And then finally, one of the questions is, how do you share risk? Right now, these fires are unprecedented. Insurance companies don't even know how to price that risk. Who pays? We have more questions than answers, so going to the Mother Nature analogy we started with, I think I might say we're the eldest and anxious child. Because we have serious concerns, we have a lot of questions, and it's going to be more than just the PUC and utilities handling this. We're happy to roll up our sleeves as we did during the fires and in recovery, but this is a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon.
So Laura, the answer to how we're going to pay for it is we're going to put it all on the backs of the investor utilities, and they're going to use their substantial lobbying resources to tell the California legislature we don't build anymore in high fire hazard areas, right? Is that the solution? Possibly one solution. Anyway, thank you, Laura. It was actually tongue-in-cheek, but, sort of tongue-in-cheek. Our next speaker is Rory Skay. She's Chief Deputy Director of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. Her background is in environmental science, advanced degrees, and she has presided over about, 70 or some thousand acres that the Conservancy has acquired in Southern California. Rory?
Thank you, Joe. And this topic has personal resonance for me. My son is a captain with Montecito Fire District, so he spent 2 weeks fighting the Thomas Fire and protecting his city and local communities, and then almost immediately went into the search and recovery mode with the fire district in Montecito, so very close to home. So as Joe said, I'm with the Conservancy. I've been on the staff for about 28 years now. The mission of the agency is connecting people to nature and wildlife to habitat. That's at least one of our missions. We have protected over 75,000 acres. Mostly that's wildland. There's been a lot of urban projects as well. Those are over 2 counties, Ventura and Los Angeles counties. And plus with other joint powers authorities that the Conservancy is a member of, we also have projects in Orange County and eastern Los Angeles County. So part of what we've been trying to do for all these years is to set aside by purchase, donation, or dedication key parcels for wildlife habitat and public recreation throughout the mountains and actually into the valley floor, into the urban core. These are properties that otherwise would have been developed, and that I think is part of what we're looking at is that to actually protect future homeowners, don't put their homes in harm's way. And we really feel that it's a better solution both for the general good of the area, of the state, to have vast interlinking properties that allow for gene flow with the animals, for trails, for recreation, and for watershed protection. And when those inevitable wildfires do come, that they're not right in the path of, that the homes are not right in the path of the fires. That's sort of a general perspective. It's probably a little glib, but that's basically where we'd like to go. A lot of the properties that we do own or that we're trying to acquire are already, of course, developed. Hollywood Hills, that's a WUI, wildland urban interface writ large. All those homes that are surrounded by actually native habitat and really do provide wildlife corridors that allowed the mountain lion P-22 to get from the Santa Monica Mountains to Griffith Park. But those homes are all in danger all the time. Our fire season, as everyone knows now, is basically year-round. It's not just the fall months like it used to be. So as long as those houses are there, their homeowners and businesses need to be looking at how to protect their structures from fire. A lot of the fire agencies in the counties have said, oh, there's a state minimum of 30 feet clearance, brush clearance between a structure. That's most municipalities and counties have gone far beyond that, 100 feet, 200 feet. Some want 300 feet, 1,000 feet. Well, clearly, in a wind-driven fire, 1,000 feet is not any kind of protection. And in the meantime, all you've done is scarify earth and actually degrade the public investment in parkland that's already been made for these areas. So a lot of entities are working very hard to try to get existing homeowners to think about their own neighborhoods, clearing from the house out, not trying to create a big buffer zone in between the house, wildland, and their giant bougainvillea or pine trees that are over their roofs. So that basically is not an easy, it's not going to be easy. And I don't think we have an answer for how to mitigate wildfires, except that to be totally aware that the wind events are beyond our control. And we have to have hardening of our structures and protecting people in the meantime.
Well, actually, we know how to mitigate in the California Environmental Quality Act, right? What are you supposed to do first? Before you mitigate, you avoid. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so, let's talk about avoidance at some point. Speaking of which, we're not avoiding her. Nicole England has a unique responsibility. She is Transportation and Land Use Deputy for the 3rd Supervisorial District, Sheila Kuehl's district. And basically about anything that can go right with Los Angeles County can happen in the 3rd District, and everything that can go way south can happen in the 3rd District too. Because we can have mudslides, we can have wildfires, and we can have wonderful experiences in the Santa Monica Mountains, all co-combined. So when a developer goes into the 3rd District, the developer sits down with Nicole, and when I go into the 3rd District, I sit down with Nicole, and what happens in between, Nicole is going to talk about.
So in the 3rd District, our unincorporated area is the Santa Monica Mountains. Going back to what Joe said and listening to Mother Nature, I think our main guiding principle in the Santa Monica Mountains with respect to land use is let the land dictate the use. In the county, I think we're getting better about being clear in directing folks where we want you to develop and where we absolutely don't. In 2014, the board certified the Santa Monica Mountains Local Coastal Program, and it's the first time in the county that we've said we rather have a takings claim than let you develop in the most critical habitat areas. We haven't had a taking claim yet. We'll see what happens, but it's something that I think we're trying to carry over into the other areas that are not governed by the LCP. We have a lot of education going on with our residents about emergency preparedness. Topanga Canyon, for any of you who have driven through there, it's a death trap waiting to happen in a wind-driven fire situation. We work closely with Joe and Rory to implement, we have a strong transfer development credit program an incentive program to retire critical lots where we really don't want you to develop. It's been really successful in the first 3 years. We still have a problem striking a balance. Our Regional Planning Commission just approved the ADU ordinance, accessory dwelling units. You may be aware there was a recent state law making accessory dwelling units by right. It was a very big educational experience for us to try to educate the planners who work on housing. We all know we have a critical housing shortage in California and Los Angeles, to educate them about, maybe it's not the best idea to double density in the mountains where there's not a lot of ingress and egress. It's an extreme high fire severity zone. And just getting the housing advocates to understand that there are places where maybe development isn't appropriate. It's hard to sometimes say no, but it's often the best answer when you're looking at real fire life safety problems.
Okay, this is the first, folks. I've moderated 100 panels, and this is the first panelist who has stopped her presentation prior to the person in the back
I'm
with the red
shortened to the
flag.
point.
So good. So you get additional rebuttal time. Cool. Richard Halsey is someone that we all know for all conferences, and the only person whose bio actually says, I've given 200 presentations. So good, 201 now. But if you want to know about California Chaparral and Chaparral in general, Richard is the man. California Chaparral Institute, he keeps bombarding me with such good information that I can't press the delete button on my email much as I do
Fast enough.
others. Okay? And so I'm going to just start out the question to you because we're all talking about the most incendiary potential here. And when I first went to the fire class about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the instructor, who was a state park employee, said, given a certain cubic density, you can have thermal equivalents in the chaparral to the Hiroshima bomb. And I said, is that possible? I'm asking you, what kind of possibilities do we have for a bomb out there in our chaparral, and how do we avoid that?
So I'd like to ask a personal question, if it's okay with everybody in here. And if you're comfortable answering, if you raise your hand, how many of you lost a home or have had some intimate connection with wildland fire? It changes your life, doesn't it? I was not surprised about the more than, almost as many as 10,000 structures and 46 deaths in these last fires in October and December. What's really surprising to me is there's not outrage over why did we lose so many homes and so many lives. No one's asking that question, and I don't know why. Because there's a reason to be able to live in an environment that you enjoy and still be able to feel safe. And the reason is because you're prepared. So large, infrequent wildfires are a natural event in Southern California, and Southern California is heading north, by the way, as we have witnessed with the Napa and Sonoma fires. But what's not natural is the loss of life and the loss of structures. So how do we go about addressing that? And I would like to voice to you that it's really quite simple. We need to stop putting people in harm's way, like we've already discussed. And for those homes that are there, the issue with homes is when they burn usually from the house out in. And so most of these homes ignite from embers. And there's a tremendous business opportunity out here, since this conference kind of focuses on that. Wet homes don't burn. In Australia and Canada, they figured this out with external fire sprinklers. So what we've got here is we have a dilemma. We have the municipal fire agencies that are used to trying to save lives. And what do? You put internal sprinklers in, and that's what they're for. And they're not to save the buildings, they're to save lives. Then you have the wildland fire people, and their job in their mind is just put out the fire. The problem now is we've got these two things together, and they're trying to put out the fire, and you can't. So you turn the system around because wet homes don't ignite. As I saw a lot of those homes in Ventura burn down in the Thomas Fire, I was just shaking my head because they didn't have to burn. If they were properly prepared with retrofits, they could have been saved, many of them. And LA County now, I think it's LA City actually, has an ordinance with retrofitting for earthquake, and you've got to do it within the next 20 years, I think, is that what it is? The same thing should be required in existing communities in high fire zone areas. They have to retrofit with external sprinklers and all the other fire safe features like ember resistant vents within 20 years. And there's all sorts of ways to do that with incentives and interest-free loans and that kind of thing. And that is an approach that actually can work, because currently the model is, well, let's just get rid of the problem, and the problem is nature. And I'd like you, if you forget anything in this conference, don't forget this. It's not fuel, it's habitat. It's actually quite beautiful, which is why we're here. And so once we realize that, we won't refer to it as a nuclear bomb potential. It's where a lot of creatures live that we enjoy. And so if we turn it around, the WUI is not an issue, it's a natural issue, it's a social issue. We put ourselves in these environments and we can get ourselves out of it and stop losing so many homes and lives if we turn it around. And the final thing I'd like to leave is, and the way you look at it is, instead of trying to put out fires, what we want to do is save lives and property. Those are two different questions with two radically different solutions. And if we turn it around like that, we can really have a big impact on how we can respond to wildfires.
Okay. So we have admirably reserved at least 15 minutes, maybe more, for audience participation. And I'm going to call on audience participation. We have Nancy Sutley, who served in the city of Los Angeles, and we sent her back to Washington for a little sojourn with the Obama administration with the Council on Environmental Quality. She's back here with us now. Nancy, give us 1 minute reaction to what you've heard.
No pressure. You know, I think this is it's a challenge, right, for policymakers to figure out what, you know, how you approach a problem like this. I was working for the federal government when Sandy hit New York and New Jersey in particular, and these questions about obviously protecting life and safety and is number one, but then there are issues around protecting critical infrastructure, and then in sort of what are the standards for deciding whether you should put people in harm's way or not, or whether the risks are worth taking or not, and what are the tools that you can use to you know, to try to help decision makers, whether they're at the federal level, the state level, the local level, the regional level, to understand that. So whether it's looking at the flood maps, the FEMA flood maps, whether it's looking at how you assess sort of wildland fire risk and the wildland urban interface. And those are all really challenging questions, but they're ones that we can avoid no longer, because we can't sustain, you know, year after year, you know, millions of dollars worth of natural disaster damage that could have been avoided, whether it was as a result of Hurricane Sandy or the hurricanes this year. Look at the devastation in Puerto Rico, whether it's the fires and mudslides in California. I think we, you know, in a changing climate, we have got to figure these things out.
You're right, Nancy. We have to figure them out, and I asked you to do it in 1 minute, and it didn't happen. So. But the rest of our folks are going to. So Andy Lipkiss is here, the founder of the Tree People. Andy, you've got 1 minute to solve the problem.
Thanks for taking it first. So I've got 90 seconds of thinking further. I'm sounding like a broken record here, but and this is with sympathy and empathy for the position that some of you are in as regulators and targets for lawsuits and everything else. But the new norm means this is real. It's here. It's now. And just to enhance the fear for a second, Richard, you spoke so sanely. It was great. I think NASA just released a study that 30% of the chaparral died in the Santa Monica Mountains in the last couple of years because of the drought. So not only is it what normally can burn anyhow, it's now that much more dangerous. And so how do we respond to the new norm? Now, you know, we have a year-round fire season. We can't breathe thinking that, well, we'll take this on next year in terms of preparing people, exactly as you said. Joe, you're one of the few people who has Nomex clothes, but maybe everyone living in the Santa Monica Mountains actually needs to know what that is, needs to understand the ecosystem and be able to smell, as some of us can, the vapors rising out of the chaparral. We're ready to burn if there's a spark, and to alert their neighbors. I mean, there's a whole lot of preparedness that needs to happen. I wonder about if the insurance industry is actually going to help facilitate solving this, because they may start forcing people to do the mitigation that you're saying, or not letting them be there before government can even act, because they can't afford to sustain the kinds of losses that are happening. Last thing is best practice in this field. Southern California was the creator, and this is my broken record. We created the integrated emergency command system because of our wildfires. The need to bring multiple agencies together, train, cooperate, link together with mutual aid agreements that allow them to suspend who's going to pay who when, and work together. They literally had to figure out how to have different agencies all have the same hose couplings. They couldn't do that before this program. You know, they had different hose couplings. They couldn't share equipment. They didn't have the same radio frequencies. That part has happened. But if we take that best practice, which has traditionally saved a lot of lives, and move that into the plan, recognizing that we're in this state of emergency, a chronic state of emergency, and deploy our agencies in a full-time collaborative governance setup to look at how do we need to change policies, how do we need to change resources, so we're informing our people in a really transparent way and keeping everybody aware and awake. And so we can also transform the billions of dollars we spend year in and year out in this county on infrastructure. So it's all being moved into high priority for resilience and sustainability at the same time.
Thank you, Andy. So you suggested everybody should have Nomex. I got to tell you, Nomex pajamas would be really uncomfortable.
Hey, Joe.
I'm going to pose something to our panel. So Richard, you can respond,
Okay.
but let me first give a general suggestion to each of you, 1 minute each. So in economics, there's the fallacy of sunk costs, right? I've already spent $100 million. If I don't continue the same policy, by God, all that money will be wasted. However, if I continue to spend another $100 million on the same policy, then we will have $200 million wasted, okay? And so smart economics says, cut your losses. So now, given the fact that we have continued a policy which has only given us more and more damage from fires and floods and other problems with not living with nature, is it time, and how can we justify cutting our losses and doing it different? I'm going to ask each panel member to respond to that. So, Edgar?
Well, you gave me a lot of time to think here. No, I mean, your observation is a good one. I mean, we all understand that there's not enough money in the world to attack, the massive challenges ahead of us. And finance is definitely a key part of that. I think we need to work various mechanisms, including, well, what we've identified like resilience co-ops. We don't want to depend necessarily on the government to take care of things. Why not looking at, say, vertical resilience when we look at cities? If we look at Los Angeles, within 10 years, 16 million people, fastest growing urbanizing city in the US. So how do we recreate that thinking and make building owners, investors, part of the question themselves, and let them take ownership as part of the bigger structure that is out there to share that ownership. So I think it's a dialogue, between governments. It's a dialogue with the multiple stakeholders. And yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a more clear answer to your big question here.
Laura?
So I think the answer is yes, we do things differently. And from my perspective, I think different things that you have to think about are how and who does regulating of what the standards are, of how we respond to fires, of how we plan for fires. Like for us, we have a regulator that's an electric regulator, but also regulates hot air balloons and also regulates gas and also regulates several other things. And they're the ones that look at our emergency plan. Does that make sense? It might. It's worked in the past. But again, unclear it's going to work in the future. That's one type of question. Another one is, how do you integrate what we do and where we put our poles into where people are building or not allowed to build? Where does that happen? It happens sometimes in our applications after the fact. We've chosen a route. People come in and say, don't put it there. Probably not the right way to do it. Those are the kinds of questions that we'll have to have answered. Same thing. One very real thing that will need to happen is in California right now, there's this legal theory. It's called inverse condemnation. And if you're an electric utility and your system gets implicated in a fire, even if you didn't start it, there's strict liability. You will have to pay for it. If that happens, you're not going to have electric utilities. And that may be an outcome some people want. We should discuss that. But those are the kinds of things, that structures that have been here for a long time that need to change to respond to kind of whatever you define as the problem in the new normal. Everybody seems to agree there is a problem. So yes is the answer.
Rory?
I'm not quite sure how we could get the legislature to do this, but it seems to me if you added up all the costs of fighting those fires, the subsequent property losses from people whose businesses were destroyed or weren't able to operate, maybe there needs to be a big new assessment on every either new structure or existing structure to actually pay for fire protection, fire retrofits. Of course, that would also encompass flood and mud, but I think it's all money. And that's going to be the tough one. I don't know how we impose that unless people start hurting even more and more.
So Nicole, you gave us an extra couple of minutes earlier, and I'm going to reciprocate by giving you the platform, because it really all comes down to the regulations, land use regulations, what kind of conditions, where and when. So talk to us about that, Nicole.
I think government sometimes isn't as fast to respond as they should be. I think right now we have a great opportunity in the Santa Monica Mountains. We're in the process of updating our North Area Plan, which is everything in the mountains outside of the coastal boundary. Interesting what Richard said about exterior sprinklers. Our planning commissioner has a house out near Ojai, and all of her neighbors' homes around her burnt. Hers did not, because she had exterior sprinklers, and she came back and said, we absolutely have to do this in the Santa Monica Mountains. So that's something that we're looking at, including in our North Area Plan updates. Things like looking at wind corridors and how that implicates fire, and where you may or may not site your house is another thing that we're looking at that we haven't done in the past. I think we have a lot of good opportunities ahead of us to actually make the changes that are necessary. And then just to Andy's point quickly, insurance companies I think are engaged, but just not in the right way. I have received numerous calls from homeowners who are calling to complain that they can't get their fire insurance because their insurance company wants them to clear more than the county regulation of 200 feet, and they want them to clear 400 feet, which takes them into parkland. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm sure that Rory and Joe will both agree, we don't want private homeowners clearing into parkland. We want to protect the native habitat that is more fire retardant. And it's interesting that that's what the insurance companies focus on, rather than focusing on maybe more better solutions.
Richard, give us the last word.
Well, no, I mean, this is the thing. If 100 feet is good, let's do 300 feet. It's not working.
Right.
It just isn't working. And Andy brought up a good point. You know, government's not good at a lot of things, but one thing it's good at is bringing people together in a room and talking and talking and talking. Let's get them talking about how can we save lives and property and coordinate the patterns together so we know where the poles need to go and where not to put a house on the edge of a mesa. That's what government can do. Another thing is you might want to bring in the market system on this and internalize costs. Right now, all the profits are internalized. Why not the costs? The taxpayers have to pay all these costs for fire suppression and liability and all that when these communities go down. Fountain Grove 2, the community up in Santa Rosa, if you're familiar with that, talking about neutron or atomic bombs, that's what it looks like up there. You sit on a hill and you look in all directions. You cannot see a non-burned home. The community, everybody up there knew that that was a fire hazard when they built those things. Where's the liability there? I think we have to look at the people who actually made the decisions and ask that question. And in terms of development, have the developer post a fire bond, B-O-N-D, and that bond will be funded by the tax base that the community actually expanded because of that development. The developer can kick in some money, even some of the homeowners. And so when the disaster comes, because it will, then all of a sudden the costs are now being paid for by the people who actually caused the community to be developed in the first place. So there's sort of a three-pronged approach there. Government, regulatory intervention, and then some sort of market forces there. And also I really think we have to think about liability because a lot of these things happen 20, 30 years after people have either passed away or retired, and the firefighters and the homeowners are left holding the bag. And that's the thing we have to fix.
Okay, so this is the time for questions and answers. Most people who ask questions actually want to make a comment. So let's be honest about it. We've got 4 or 5 minutes left. Who wants to make a comment and add to our shake and bake discussion here? Yes, please.
I actually wanted to ask a question. That's okay. And I wanted to ask Edgar to start off because it seems like I've been to the Netherlands and I mean, the people in the Netherlands are water people. They've learned how to deal with resilience because there's so much water there and they're underwater. And was just wondering, how has the Netherlands been so successful with this, whereas here in California and elsewhere, where we're struggling with trying to, we're putting sandbags in front of Goldman Sachs. What in your idea has led to that?
Why did we do that? Editorial, I'm sorry.
The federal government of the Netherlands that kind of pushed things in that direction? Was it economics that, private businesses said, we need to become very good at this and make sure that we can deal with it? Or was it something else or a combination?
I would say there are two angles to your great question. Two things people in the Netherlands don't like, just like people in the US don't like: rules and taxes. We pay a lot of taxes in the Netherlands. 50-60% is not an exception. And we have things regulated by law. So when it comes to water management, there is no question what we are doing. The once in a 10,000 year that many people are questioning for cities makes total sense if you look at the benefit cost of the values that are at stake. So you need rules, you need laws to give direction to policies. Also, we have a very substantial time horizon. We don't think 10, 20, 50 years ahead. We think 100 years ahead. So, it's really that, I would say, high-hanging fruit that gives direction to what we are doing. I think a general observation here, Americans really have their eye on the ball. They're really good at recovery and response, but longer-term planning is a different animal. So I would say long-term planning, taxes and rules.
Long-term planning next year. Yes, ma'am.
For Richard, and that is, we're talking a lot about the interface in terms of the homes, but what do you see in terms of the new normal, in terms of the impacts on habitat?
In terms of the fires, or this is usually I don't talk like this because I usually have to go to the bar afterwards. But I mean, climate change is going to have a significant impact on how plant communities are distributed. And right now, if you look 50 years forward, according to projections, areas where chaparral is sustainable, that's the shrubland habitat that we have around Southern California here. There's no room for it in Southern California anymore. It's all heading north. And a lot of what's going to replace it here, unfortunately, is probably going to be weedy non-native grasslands. The forests that we have in the San Bernardinos are probably going to be turning into chaparral and oak woodlands. And this is concerning because everybody, well, at least the people that like to talk about how bad nature is, they hate chaparral. Well, that may be the only natural community that's resilient enough to withstand climate change. And it's probably going to be heading north. So to answer your question, I think there's going to be a significant impact. And probably, according to the models anyway, the next drought cycle, which is probably going to be within the next 40 years or sooner, apparently this year is getting pretty bad, the average drought will be worse than the most extreme droughts we had for the last 1,000 years. So there's going to be towns that are going to have to shut down. We have to plan for this. And just one last thing. There's boulders the size of cars in the middle of the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but I'm wondering, did anyone wonder, gosh, how those boulders get there? And so, Andy, what you were saying before, just get a map on the table and start looking, where's the next disaster? Because we can figure it out based on what we know. And that's the best way to approach that angle. Natural habitat-wise, I don't know what we can do. Just hope the chaparral can hang in there long enough to recover.
We're going to leave the solution of that to Mother Nature. We've come to the end of our program. We have 4 minutes left? Really? Well, good. Okay.
Question. We haven't yet confronted, except that you brought it up, the threat to human life. And so we have a population that is pretty functionally environmentally illiterate. They're going to be trapped if we get any wind conditions like we saw in Santa Barbara. What are you doing now, or what should you be doing in the next days and weeks to wake up, shake the public out of denial, and prepare them for appropriate behavior to save their lives when the fire starts nearby?
Who was that addressed to?
Everybody there has some, well, except our offshore person. Everyone has some authority, domain with people living in there. And it may not be your responsibility, but with the county, with the city, with the conservancy, the people who live in your lands, whose job is, and maybe that's the other question, whose job is it? to inform
Everyone's.
the public,
Okay,
prepare
so
them?
let's, panelists, have at it.
I'll just start with a couple of things that Southern California Edison does, and it's kind of a combination of everything we've talked about here. So our program involves vegetation management, right? So we're told to keep the lines certain distance from our poles. That's one thing. Can we keep them? We're having a discussion about best practices tomorrow at the CPUC in their en banc on fire safety. So that's one thing we do. Another thing we're looking at is technology. Are there ways to shut down the wires that are electrified when they fall to the ground and they're going to fall on ground that's dry? Like, it's technology. We've got to test it. We're looking at different things. So we're pushing the envelope on that one as well. But we've got to do more. Those are a couple of the types of things that we're doing. And then another thing that we do, and we don't do it very often, but the fires of the last month have kind of highlighted whether or not we should, is shutting off power. And there's a big debate about it. Like, somebody told me the story that when these power shutoffs started in San Diego years ago, and there was a big debate about whether or not they should do them. And then when the Northern California fires started, the media in Northern California learned about what San Diego had done and said, "Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this?" And then when the fire started in Southern California, the question was, we started to do it, or we did one, and then everybody was like, "Why are you doing this? Stop doing this. Don't do this." So there's no real agreement on what best practices are. And we're kind of on the way, on the journey, but those are a couple of the types of things that are in the discussion.
Right?
And then, of course, the obvious, which I think a number of emergency agencies already do, is you sign up for the cell phone alert or the home alert when there's an imminent problem, whether it's fire, flood, or mud. Obviously, the people of Montecito didn't have enough warning about the mud. mandatory evacuation zones, voluntary evacuation zones, those are definitely hit and miss. But having some kind of electronic notice, whether it's air raids or air raid sirens or whatever, I mean, I think that's what we're going to have to go to.
I'll answer. The Office of Emergency Services, not CAL FIRE, not the Sheriff's Department, but an integrated unit that's got everybody at the table. And I think that office is the best one to do it.
So,
then it's
Mr.
just-
L.A.,
Thank you, Joseph.
Tom Labange.
You were on, I remember the last Friday of the month. The last Friday of the month should be emergency preparedness, whether it's earthquake, fire, floods, or whatever. We did it back, because that gave us great awareness. Anyone who remember the early sixties, Andy. That's number one. Number two, how many pools are in the Santa Monica Mountains? And should we require a pump in each pool with 150 hose and some way to use it? Lastly, when there was a fire at the observatory, the brush clearance between the Greek Theater and the observatory saved the observatory because there was no brush to make the fire run. Engine 35, 56, 27s, and all the crews, 82s, did it quick. So last Friday of the month, Joe, you've done so many magical things, you could do it again for your detail that, and then also with the pools. I think that's a good thing. Thank you all very much.
Let's give our panelists a good hand here. Thank you. Thank you all.